My name is Ann Friedman, and I am the retiree chapter chair. Samantha Sherry, who just covered up her beautiful flip face, there she is. Samantha Sherry is our staff person today, who's doing all the behind the scenes tech. And Bonnie Nelson, our vice chair, will be not our vice chair, sorry, our secretary. We'll be keeping time. So I hope that wherever you're zooming in from, you're healthy and safe. It's October, and we still have our healthcare as we know it. And we made it through September, and I think that that is a pretty big deal. We're going to be talking more about that in the second part of our program. And thank you to all of you who sent in Act Now letters, who wrote your own personal letters. Many of you have been sending me copies of your letters. People have been calling, maybe trying to get to see city council people. And in the second half, we'll see how we can do that more effectively. Well, October means that November is next, and November means midterm elections 2022. And I don't have to say anything about how important these elections are, starting from very local elections to more bigger statewide elections. So like me, I assume you're being inundated with snail mail and email and texts and phone calls and asking you to support different candidates in a myriad of elections around the country. And some of us send money, and some of us also participate in that canvassing. But today, we're going to hear from 4 speakers who will offer us some actions that we can take with organizations that work directly with voters and organizations that can and have made a significant difference in outcomes of key competitive races. Our first speaker is Susan Kang. Susan will provide an overview of the essential role that on-the-ground political work plays in influencing election outcomes. Susan is now the chair of the political science department at John Jay College. She's a senior college officer on the PSC Executive Council. She's a member of New York City Democratic Socialists of America, okay? And she's an occasional commentator on New York One. She's the author of Human Rights and Labor Solidarity, Trade Unions and Global Economy, and much, much more. But Susan's going to speak for about 15 minutes, take some Q&A, and then she's going to have to leave for her John Jay chairperson duties, and we'll have the rest of the program to follow. So Susan, we welcome you and look forward to what you have to say.
Okay, hi everybody. I can answer any questions that you might have after I make my presentation about organizations. I didn't focus that much on it for my presentation because I wanted to talk to you about sort of the broader overview that I think really makes a great argument for why grassroots organizing will make a big difference, but from like sort of a more like an eagle eye view. And so hopefully this will be helpful and interesting and thought-provoking and not too repetitive of things you already know. Because I wanted to really put my political scientist hat on when I spoke to you all. And okay, so I'm going to share a presentation I've made, and I'm not sure if there's anything too groundbreaking here, but these are the things that I think about when people want me to tell them about the midterms. Okay. Let me present this. I'm not sure why I can't find the presentation tool. Here we go. Okay. So I've been told I speak fast, so I'm gonna try to speak slow. And if anybody wants me to repeat myself, you can just say it in the chat. That'd be helpful. Okay. Okay, so for me, there's a lot at stake here. And one of the things that when you look at the national level polling and polling as well in New York, one of the first things that people list about their concerns is the future of democracy. And of course, it means different things depending on which side of the aisle you sit on, if you're a Republican or Democrat. But people in the United States, people in New York, like locally, people are worried about the future of democracy. And I think that we'll all agree that that's not a crazy concern to have. Okay, so I'm also someone who, in my teaching and my research, I'm really interested in the fragility of long-standing democracies. So both like in Europe, North America, because historically people thought that if you were rich enough and you had like a history of elections, there's just no way that your democracy could like go away, right? This was like the stuff that I learned in grad school and in undergrad in like the 90s and the 2000s. As it turns out, people are changing their opinions because all the stuff that's happening in the world right now suggests that that's just not true anymore, right? So if you were like me, like addicted to your phone last night, trying to figure out what's happening yesterday in Brazil, then you know that everybody expected a blowout for Lula, the left candidate, against Bolsonaro, like, of course, but it didn't happen. And we're going to go to another election in October 30th. Okay, so one of the things that give alarm bells to scholars of democracy is that Americans and like Western Europeans, we are reporting really low levels of trust in our political institutions. We report low levels of trust in democracy overall. We don't necessarily see the efficacy of voting. And it becomes one of these like paradoxes in which people don't want to vote. They don't trust our institutions. And so they don't vote, even though their desire for change might be the necessary step that we need to bring about the changes. So anything you do in this general election to change the minds of people who might otherwise not engage is a huge contribution, right? Whatever organization you work with, whether you go outside of New York, whether you go like to less like purple districts outside of New York City, it makes a huge difference because turnout is going to be a huge decisive factor in this midterm election. The other thing, the two more points I want to make, which are related, is that young people are, many of you here have much more experience, working with young people, teaching young people than I do, but they like literally are the future. Like if you look at the polling data, if you look at all sort of the expressed opinions of the younger generations, they support all the things that we want, right? Like healthcare for all, better like childcare, funding for public education. Like they support the things that would make our democracy seem fairer to all, but they also tend to not really vote too, right? They also express high levels of disillusionment with our government institutions. So turning out young people is also like a really important thing for 2022. Okay, so now I have all these like visuals because that's how I teach. I love visuals. So I apologize if there's too many visuals. Okay, so in general, the midterm election is seen as a referendum on the presidential party and the president's performance so far, right? And traditionally, right, so this data goes back here to like Eisenhower, the president in power loses a lot of congressional seats and Senate seats, and we don't love that, right? Because it's already so tight as it is in the Senate and the House. But the times when that hasn't been the case, are right. So Clinton in 1998, for example, did gain some House seats as well as W in 2002, right? Gained some House and Senate seats. So this is like 2018 is sort of the midterm election that's most like fresh in our minds. And that was like a big deal. Like they called that like the blue wave, although it wasn't that much of a wave compared to how much that Obama had lost when he had his first midterm election in 2010, right? That was like tsunami of Republican gains. Okay. And the other thing too, though, is that typically midterm elections are low turnout compared to general elections in presidential years, right? So people's votes matter more than ever in a midterm. But the funny thing that happened in 2018 was because so many people mobilized and registered voters and worked to try to defeat Trump that for the first time, like there was this magnificent jump in turnout in 2018. And so that's what grassroots organizing can do, right? Whether it's phone banking or whether it's, canvassing, like whatever you're able to do, or writing postcards, it can turn out voters who would otherwise stay at home, and that makes a huge difference, right? So 2018 was the year of the blue wave, in which we were able to gain a bunch of seats in Congress, and that's significant. Okay, so support for Biden is not high. So that's not like, we don't love this, right? So this is data from, I believe it's Reuters, and it's an interactive thing that I wasn't able to steal because they made it proprietary. So I just took a screenshot, right? And disapproval rates were high. Approval rates were higher when he started. They've sort of gone down and up, right? So Biden's not doing an amazing job selling what he's done. So we can't really do a lot about that. But what we can do, right, is to try to turn out voters who will reliably vote for Democrats. And as I said before, young people, right, traditionally are voting in very low numbers, but they voted a lot in 2018. So their participation can make a huge difference, right? So if you were to say, I have time to vote in one particular area, a place with, for example, a lot of college students, right, might be a great place to focus on your efforts. I actually read that if college students turn out to vote, then all the purple seats in New York would go Democratic. So Biden is very strong with America's youngest voters, right? If you think about any polling data, because they tend to call landlines, it tends to favor older voters, right? So there is support for Biden among young people. This is like data from 2018. So it's like, sorry, this is data from 2020 too. So they were like asking if we were repeating the 2020 election, what would your votes be like, right? So Gen Z and millennials, majority of them support Joe Biden. So getting them to come out to vote, because like I said, they don't turn out to vote, is a huge deal. And also they're now together the largest numerical voting bloc in the United States, right? So I'm like marginal Gen X, right? We're like the loser generation. We're not that big. And then the baby boomers and the greatest generation, they're going down in numbers as well. Okay, so as a socialist, one of the things that's interesting is that young people tend to have more negative views of capitalism. They tend to have positive or very positive views of capitalism. And regardless of what your individual opinions are, that's good for things like funding healthcare, for funding CUNY, right? For funding like our infrastructure, all the things that we know that we desperately need. Yes, and I can happily give a copy of these slides to anybody who would like them. Okay. And then also, young people tend, like I said earlier, not to trust traditional forms of authority, although well done, they do kind of like college professors. So that's not bad. Like our approval rates are pretty high. But they don't really respect elected officials, right? They don't really trust them. And why would they? Because elected officials are the ones who've been in charge that have given young people like a planet on fire, right? One in which they're being told like Medicare, Social Security will not be there for you because we have failed to fund it. And also don't expect any help when you have babies. Don't expect to have an affordable time when you have children, because that's just not something we care about. Okay. And ironically, though, they do favor more government, right? They favor government spending. They think, right? They're also very progressive. They love diversity, right? So all the things you hear about, like the talks about, like, what's the thing called critical race theory, that's not being driven by young people, right? Young people like diversity. They very much reflect some of the views that our students have. Okay, so a lot of things are up in the air right now that we don't know the answers to. But again, this is where grassroots organizing and doing whatever you can, whatever you're able to do. I would like to go to Philadelphia, for example, at some point, the Philly suburbs, and knock on doors for the Senate race there. Is that whatever you can do will make a difference, because whatever you can do can turn out voters who would otherwise stay home. There's a lot of internal Republican Party drama, and we don't know how that's going to go. It looks like it's going towards Trump, but of course, that's not great overall for the future of the Republican Party. I think a lot of people were hoping that the abortion decision would turn out a lot of Democrats and potentially swing some voters over to the Democratic candidates. That may be happening in more like purple states. That might be happening more with young people who have like larger population areas. In like red states, like a lot of young people moved to Texas, for example, because of the pandemic, and they may be a significant voting bloc in a red state like Texas. But the polling data doesn't suggest that people are putting abortion at the top of their concerns. What the polling data says is that people care about economic concerns and democracy. And so that's another thing to think about too, is that I'm always just like, are we going to have a recession? Like, what's going on, right? So every day I hear maybe we're having a recession. All I know is that interest rates are really, really high. And one of the findings that political scientists do have is that voters tend to punish the party in power during a recession. So depending how people feel the day of the general election, people may want to punish the Democrats because of the economic situation. So we don't know what that's going to look like. I read a lot of conflicting things. I don't have a good crystal ball. And then finally, like, as somebody who, volunteered for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I always wonder, what's the future of the Democratic Party? Because it's not going to be Joe Biden. Kamala Harris is not a very popular politician. Who's going to run in 2024, right? So a lot of the things that matter, that's at stake, is that, like, depending on how progressives do, to what extent will the values that the people, are activists and in the PSC, other public sector retirees, so things that we care about, will they be represented in the Democratic Party, or will there be sort of more of the same, in which, sort of centrists are really leading the way? Okay, I hope I didn't speak too long. I'm going to end here, and I can stick the presentation in the chat or email it to Anne, whatever's desired.
I,
Okay.
I think sending it to me would be the best thing, right, Bonnie? I don't know if people can, I captured in the chat. I don't know how that works.
Yeah. Yes, send it to Ann, and we can put out a query if anybody wants you to send it to them.
Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions, comments. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your Zoom hand, which you can find under reactions at the bottom of your screen. I see Peter Reynes and then Robert Cowan. So, hi, Peter. Oh, I have to ask you to keep your questions to a minute and a half, 90 seconds.
Susan, thank you for your presentation. I have a question. I have some colleagues who are, I would call extreme left, and they constantly criticize the DSA, and they would even criticize Stacey Abrams as too centrist. How would you defend, if you want to, defend the DSA before these ultra leftists that are some of my colleagues?
So thanks for your question. I think that everyone's entitled to have their own opinion about any organization and their strategy and tactics. I think that it's very easy to criticize organizations or activists or organizers who are doing stuff and trying to build power, whether in New York State, New York City, or nationally. And I think that I don't think that their criticisms mean that the work that we do isn't valuable, but it potentially we might have different goals, but at least medium term. And when you do union organizing, some people are always going to be a 5. They're never going to sign your card. And some people are going to be a 5, even if they see themselves on your side ideologically. And that's okay. We're all allowed to have our own orientations and our own goals. And I wish them well in trying to defend, American democracy and the future of our planet. We all can do what we should do. We all should do what we can do. That's all.
Thank you. Robert Callen?
Hi. One group of people that I've been supporting is the Poor People's Campaign. I'm wondering, poor people are traditionally don't vote in large numbers. Do you have statistics on that and what difference it would make, and if there's been any progress in getting poor people to vote?
Yeah, so I think the Poor People's Campaign does excellent work. I know people who have worked within the organization, and I think that getting poor people to vote is a lot like getting anybody else to vote. Like, a lot of people don't vote, right, across ideological and socioeconomic spectrums, which is that you have to convince them that it's important, that their vote matters, and to ask them to make a plan to vote. And the other thing that works is fighting for reforms that make voting easier. Like in California, you can just drop off your ballot in any voting booth in your county the day of, right? In Washington State, you can mail in your ballot. Everybody can do it within a month before the election, right? So there's many ways we could make voting more accessible. In some places, there are like block captains. I know that in NYCHA, there's been a lot of work like in getting like polling places in NYCHA, and that, people who work within the tenant organization, getting people to turn out. I think there's lots of different models. But again, talking to people, convincing them about the importance of their vote and what's at stake, I think that works across different populations, and then trying to figure out a way to make it easier for people to vote. I remember talking to somebody once who was just like, I really would vote, but I'm very, very tired. And I've been working for 12 hours on my feet all day. And this person was like in their 60s. So I certainly could understand why that would be exhausting, right? So the more alternatives to allow for voting, the better. And of course, in New York City, a lot of information gets like given to voters over their head. As a volunteer for candidates, one of the things that I think that I'm doing is I'm also giving people information, like civic information that they might have otherwise lost because they're just getting a ton of junk mail every day. So, like I said, same strategies and tactics.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to take 3 more questions and then let Susan go to her other job. I see Nancy Romer.
Hi, Susan, thanks so much. As always, you're informative and helpful, practical too. So I'm interested in a couple of things. One is, are you seeing any fine tuning in terms of the various platforms that are doing the electoral work to speak to specific voting blocks, that is to young voters, to older voters like that, because it makes a huge difference. I know if you go out to certain neighborhoods, you're more likely to get one or another. So that's one question. And then I wanted to ask you about the question of framing, like specifically about abortion and the question of democracy. When we talk about abortion, that is useful to many of us. It's not a useful frame to others, as opposed to control over our own lives. Our kids should have the same rights as we had, as opposed to confronting people's concerns about abortion directly. And just to know that in a lot of communities, the right wing is pushing against late-term abortions. No one's talking about late-term abortions. but that's what the right wing is talking about. Aborting babies. This is their language. So I don't know if both the fine tuning for specific populations and the framing, what language you're finding most useful to use.
Thank you, Nancy.
Should we, okay, let me
Well,
answer this
it's
very
two
quick.
questions. I don't, do you want me to take the other two people and then you'll just speak to,
Sure,
yeah,
yeah,
okay.
let's do that.
And, okay, hi Renata. Renata's next.
Hi, thank you for taking my hand up.
Oh, take your hand. I love your hand.
I have my question is, first of all, the back to my question is a lot of the voting inquiries are about domestic policy, which of course affects us immediately, directly, and is super important. However, a lot of what happens domestically is affected by foreign policy. So my question is, are any of these surveys, do they take into account opinion on American foreign policy? I'm thinking of the war in Europe and the portending war in Asia and its possible effect on domestic economy. So I'm just asking if any of these surveys take that foreign policy issue into account.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
oh, so-
And Abigail Mellon will be the last question.
Hi, this actually is a plug more than a question. It's a plug for Indivisible, which is Insta organization, Insta group. They have a bunch of websites. I was phone banking for 2 hours, hour yesterday. They have buses, they do. But the point is, it's like right on your doorstep. You don't have to do anything. You just email them and they'll tell you stuff to do. It's a plug. So that's my.
Thank you. Yes, they are good organization and I'm plugged in the Northeast Bronx.
Right.
Okay, Susan, you have a number of things here.
yeah, okay, so as for tailoring, I think that a good organization will train you on how to tailor your message for a different population. Like, so for example, if I knock on doors of like higher income people, I almost always lead with climate, then more so than I would like tax the rich, right? Because they're very privileged people, but they also are vulnerable to floods, extreme weather, and the warming of our planet, right? So I think that good organizations will train you in a way to figure out how to basically profile people and try to figure out what works. But also, to me, I've been canvassing and like in different ways since I was like 20. I was hired as like an intern for the AFL-CIO for Union Summer in 2000, maybe 2001. So I was 21. Just to stand on the street corners of Seattle to ask people to sign a petition. So I'd frame it differently based on like trial and error. So a lot of stuff about learning how to tailor is something that people develop through practice. If I see a woman and I'm just like, there's like shoes outside the house that are small, then I'm like, I always lead with the fact that I'm also a mother, right? So, and maybe it's manipulative, but like, it is kind of like doing sales, right? Good political canvassing is sales. I haven't talked that much about right wingers really, unless people want to talk about those things. I think that abortion is like a really important issue to a lot of people. And luckily in New York, we have good laws because of the great work like activists like those who are in this room have done to defeat Republican majorities in New York State, because we didn't have these laws until 2019, which is an abomination, frankly, but nonetheless. And so, but I do think that these are things that should be discussed, particularly among activists, I think it should be used to get activists mobilized to go talk to like grassroots voters. I think that that's where it's most effective. And then what was the final question I got? It was about a poll. Okay, so I hate to say this because I'm actually trained as a comparative politics international relations person, is that foreign policies typically do not rank highly when it comes to voting, right? Even like in 2004, I was so naive and young. I was like, surely we will beat W because the war is so unpopular. But the reality is that wars and foreign policies typically do not make and break elections, right? So, which is why the left is more successful organizing around issues domestically than around issues that are like foreign policy based, right? And I don't have an answer as to how to get more people like furious about things that happen abroad, but for the most part, that isn't self-reported as a top issue. So it's not something I lead with at the doors. Although I think that people who care about those issues should mobilize and organize around them, right? It doesn't mean we should give up. I just think that like when we're doing short-term mobilizing to get people to vote in 2022 in the primary, that it's not something I would put as a high priority. I would make that a medium term or like a longer term goal. So I hope that answers your question, and I'm sorry if it's unsatisfying.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. I think it was a very edifying presentation, and I'm sure you would have lots more to say, and people would start to think up all kinds of other questions. But we really appreciate you coming today. I know you're very busy. Not only does Susan chair the department and do research and teach, but she's a mother of 2 young children, and we know that's a lot of work too. So great job, Susan, and send me whatever you have, and we'll get it out to people.
Thank you so much
Okay.
for having me, and
Yes,
thanks for
Susan.
organizing the meeting.
Thank
Hope
you.
I spoke more slowly. All right,
You
take care.
spoke perfectly, very
Right.
perfectly.
Everybody enjoy Monday. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye. The last time I heard Susan speak, she spoke so fast, and I was a lot younger. So, I asked her to try to slow down a little bit, because some of us are slowed down a little bit in lots of ways. Anyway, so the next part of this program on elections is going to be a panel of 3 people. They are going to speak consecutively, and then we'll have a Q&A for all of them. I'm going to introduce them separately because sometimes we forget who's speaking. Luke Elliott Negri is going to be next. Luke is our PSC legislative representative. He's a university-wide officer on the PSCEC. He writes extensively on politics and the labor movement, and is co-author of Gains and Losses, How Protesters Win and Lose. And Luke will talk to us about what the PSC legislative team has made available for members to become more involved. Luke. Hi, Luke.
Hi, thanks so much, Anne, and it's great to be with you all again. I always say don't tell anyone, but this is my favorite chapter in the PSC. It's tough to follow Susan Kang. There's like a short list of people in New York State who I give individual level credit for taking the Senate out of the control of the Republicans and the IDC, and she is on that very short list. So in addition to being a sharp intellectual, she has really changed the terrain for us. And I really feel like we wouldn't have gotten the funding victories that we got the last 2 cycles at the state level for CUNY if it were not for the work that she did in the 2018 cycle. So anyway, we're lucky to have her as a member of the PSC. I'm gonna try to be like super brief and vacillated between offering me 5 and 10 minutes. I like to come in under time and get to the point. I will just narrate this for me personally. I think a lot about Albany. I think about City Hall. I don't often think about DC until we had the Senate majority, narrow majority, and we had the House and the presidency. So like last year, I thought, oh, geez, I better start thinking about what happens down there, because we could actually get some, like money into CUNY out of this. And, after it became clear that the Build Back Better negotiations were going to collapse to the extent that it was really hard to imagine, for example, the federal government funding free community college or really doing anything too substantial for higher ed, I kind of tune back out, but lately I've tuned back in, partly due to some of the factors that Susan just laid out. Like, there is a real chance, and this like is kind of mind-boggling to me, that the terrain in the next 2 years at the federal government will be more favorable than the terrain we had the last couple of years. And so if that's the case, like, there is going to be another window in which we could reasonably imagine some transformative social policy coming from DC that could directly affect the City University of New York. And there's two things that need to happen. This is not rocket science. In order for that favorable terrain to open up, we need to hold on to the House of Representatives, which is to say there needs to be a Democratic majority with a bit of a cushion. And if you look at like the kind of, the Nate Silver types who try to tell you the odds of this, that, and the other thing, which I think is a bit of a pseudoscience, but there's some reality to it. That's actually the trickier task, is holding on to the House. And then we need to pick up a seat or two in the Senate so that Joe Manchin is not like the marginal vote, right? So that there's another way to count your way to 50+1 in the Senate. Those two things have to happen. And there is a real material possibility that that will happen. There is, of course, a very real possibility that will not happen. And then really DC will be awash for the next couple of years for the things that we really care about, from abortion to, of course, the thing that I'm instructed to obsess about, which is the City University of New York. So very concretely, here is what we can do. I will share a little Google form in the chat. There'll be a couple of these over the course of the meeting, but you fill that out. I will also give it to Ann and Bonnie so that they can circulate it, and you can take a moment to fill it out. Not when you're sitting in a Zoom meeting, but here are the concrete things that we're trying to make happen. So in terms of holding on to the House, we think of New York as very safe, and we have to go to Pennsylvania to do something that matters at the federal level. But in fact, because the House is so pivotal, the Staten Island and Nassau County have 3 seats that are very, very important. Like, they could fall either way. And if we can get our bodies there into those districts, which are not that far from where most of us live, we could really change the terrain nationally. And so in this form, you can indicate, yes, I am interested in getting myself to Staten Island or to Nassau County to work on CD 3, 4, and 11, I think is the Staten Island seat that Maliotakis is in. And then secondly, Peter Hogness, who was once the Clarion editor, is working closely with Seed the Vote and is kind of facilitating our members getting to Pennsylvania. And the real big value add for going to Pennsylvania is John Fetterman. Part of what's happened is that the Republicans have fielded some idiotic candidates, even in states where they should be winning. And so there's a real shot that this guy wins. But again, it's a place where, if we get bodies on the ground, we can actually move the dial. It's going to be such a tight race. So again, there's an opportunity to do some work on the ground here in New York, some work by getting on a bus and going to Pennsylvania to do some Fetterman and, of course, down ballot work. And then third, making some phone calls to both, right, to Nassau County and to Staten Island, and also to Pennsylvania from the comfort of your own home. And so I'll share this. I'll share this link in the chat. You can click it and fill it out, indicate interest. It will populate a spreadsheet that we'll be able to, kind of move you in the direction that you want to be moved, to be engaged in trying to hold the House and pick up a Senate seat or two. And Ann and Bonnie will have it to circulate it if you're not able to capture it in the chat right now. But I'll just end by reiterating, there is a real chance that we, like all the community colleges, become free next year because we have an extra seat in the Senate, because we took the effort to not lose the House of Representatives. The negotiating terrain would be vastly different. So I'll stop there. Happy to be with you all. Best chapter in the PSC. Don't tell anyone else I said it. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Okay, we're going to hear from Luke again in the second part. So thank you so much, Luke. That was really good and very specific. And we really appreciate that Luke works nonstop on all this legislative stuff, and it's so important. Okay, next is Kate Fordresher. Many of you know Kate. Kate recently retired from her position as PSC Political and Policy Director of the PSC. She will speak about Working America, a nonprofit organization founded by the AFL-CIO that is working to reach non-union members. So welcome, Kate.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually thrilled to be here and have the opportunity to talk about Working America and, listen in on everyone's concern about the midterm elections coming up. There's a lot at stake. I hope Luke is right that there's an opportunity to really gain power. I guess I have been thinking about this election as really holding on to thin majorities that we've got. Anyway, I'm really excited to be here. I wonder if people remember the debates in the AFL-CIO and the labor movement in the early 2000s about how to reach out to the broader community besides union members about issues that around class and working people that was hard as to do simply from the perspective of the unions advocating through politics and their membership and bargaining. And Working America was the organization that came out of that debate. It was founded in 2007, initially to reach out to union members' families to start canvassing, people that they knew in those communities. And it has now grown to an organization of 3.5 million members nationwide. These are, you can go to the website, which I will put in the chat, but these are people who've signed up around class issues, around housing, healthcare needs, pay, the desire to unionize, that have been built up through a kind of persuasion-oriented, deep canvassing approach that Working America has built up really over 20 years. What I want to offer is how you might be able to volunteer if you have, it would be a good compliment if you can't get on the bus, can't get out on the street to canvass. 3 years ago, Working America actually opened a volunteer opportunity as part of the methodology of reaching people, which includes paid canvassers that meet people in their homes and on the phone to send letters around issues that are identified through canvassing and a very serious information gathering process are of issue, and will turn out low income, non-union, no college, and no cable. These are kind of low information voters, low information working class voters who are just involved with daily life mostly. They make up their decision to how to vote very late in the game. When they tune in, they're very affected by friends and family and the environment that they live in, which can be actually, Trump supporters. This is a kind of counterbalance to that. And the Working America has been very successful in actually winning over voters to vote for Democratic candidates in the end. They were working in 8 battleground states with huge Senate elections, but also down ballot Congress and governor races. And the process is to sign up, and you'll get a list of 50 names to write to with a template. It is quite restricted in terms of message, because they've tested various issues, and these are the most convincing messages around healthcare. No big surprise. Healthcare, worker pay and working conditions, and housing, which are extremely important to working class people. And what you do is you hand address the envelopes. There's a form letter based on which issue you choose you want to do and which state you want to do. And then you personalize the letter with something about yourself and your concern about the issue. I mean, I have to say, I've been writing healthcare letters. I've done several hundred now to Ohio, using my husband Jim, who's part of the PSC. Concern about having his health insurance taken out from under us. So you just write a couple of lines, and then you can mail merge it and pack them up, and they're all to go into the mail on the week of October 18th. The idea being that there'll be canvassers and staff calls to these folks before the election, and that this will help warm them to the issues, and to a call from Working America asking them to vote for Democrats in the race. So I can talk more about it. I will put a sign up link in the chat. Also, the link to the organizational website. You can see more about the kinds of issues Working America takes on, and also the issues that come up in states. And if you sign up now, there's also a briefing on Thursday about how it's going in these 8 battleground states. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kate. Before we move on, I would like to request, there are 3 people calling in on the phone. We don't have your pictures and we don't have your names, and we always ask people to identify themselves. And I'll go and look to see who these. So you should know if you're on the phone. I see. Unmute. Somebody has to be unmuted at 1 through.
And I don't think it matters, and I don't think they can easily identify themselves.
Oh, they can't. Well, are we going to assume that they're PSC members?
Sure.
I hope they are, because I mean, whoever they are, they'll learn a lot if they're paying attention. But okay. I would tell a story, but I'm not going to tell a story because I don't want us to get off track. Okay, so our last speaker on the panel is actually talking to us from Oregon on the West Coast, which he can do when we meet on Zoom, and that's great. So that's Peter. Peter Hogness was for 15 years our award-winning editor of the Clarion, and currently is a volunteer with Seed the Vote, which supports grassroots organizing in swing states. So Peter, welcome.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay through, I'm sorry, hear me okay through this mic?
I hear you, yeah.
Okay, good, great. Anyway, well, thanks. So what I'm going to talk about is Seed the Vote, which is the organization partnering with unions and community groups for canvassing in 5 swing states, including Pennsylvania, which, as Luke mentioned, is something the PSC is encouraging members who would like to volunteer in Pennsylvania to take up. If you have a particular passion for volunteering in Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, they can connect you with that too. Seed the Vote is similar to a lot of other organizations that cropped up since the beginning of, since Trump's years. Swing Left, Sister District, Indivisible, which all do important, valuable work. I mean, I think what was it Susan said about the importance of building organization. It doesn't need to be a perfect organization, or everybody doesn't need to choose the same one. It's like, that's the work that pays off the long term. And when Seed the Vote takes that kind of another step, which is one reason that's the route that I've been volunteering since I retired, which is supporting, trying to change the political terrain in swing states by starting with support for locally rooted organizations. We figure changing those states and their politics is a long-term project. And so it's changed their political terrain. The people who both are in the best position to do it and who know best how to go about it are the people who are there doing it 12 months a year. So rather than start from, let's pick some good candidates and back them up, start from what are some solid organizations that do good work at election time and also organize around issues 12 months a year. There's been a lot of advantages to that. One is that what was mentioned in, I think, Nancy's question about communicating effectively with voters. They know what works. They're doing this locally all the time. They're not, trying to reach people in just the last 4 months before an election with some consultants who parachuted in from Washington. I mean, that's pejorative. That's maybe a worst case scenario, but they definitely do not have that problem. So local knowledge is one. Another is organizations are often more trusted than a candidate. Like Susan mentioned, the level of cynicism about elected officials is very high, and there are real reasons for that. If you're from an organization and working with them, canvassing for them, that's working on issues of concern to the people you're talking to, that puts you in a whole different framework. And also, by helping them strengthen their reach, their base, their operation, you're helping build their organization and its effectiveness for the future. So win or lose, hopefully win. But even if you lose, you've got something that's still around, that's not closing up its doors after the election like a candidate's campaign generally does, with some rare exceptions. I remember, in fact, that can also reinforce people being more likely to trust you. Because I remember when we were canvassing in South Central Pennsylvania with Lancaster Stands Up, I remember talking with some people who were at first, very cynical about politics, and I mean, we still were when I left. But the fact that Lancaster Stands Up had just taken out a 6-year lease on an office in downtown Lancaster, that registered with people. That meant these are folks who are sticking around. So anyway, I think it's organizations like that, and like Seed the Vote's other partners that I'll mention some of in a minute, are particularly effective at engaging infrequent or inconsistent voters or new voters. They're not, they don't have a monopoly on that. Like, Kate mentioned, that's a particular strength of the kind of work and targeting that Working America does. But that is like one of their real strong suits. And I think one of Seed the Vote's biggest canvassing partners, both in 2020 and now, is a union, Unite Here, the hospitality union. This had a big canvassing program. In 2020, so many of their members were laid off. They were able to employ many of them as canvassers for like 4 weeks, 6 weeks for long stretches. And one thing that Unite Here has pioneered that, I think has been particularly effective is using what in a way is a basic labor organizing technique from a union drive. When you do a home visit, you don't send a new person to that worker's door every time. You try and have the same person call them consistently or show up at their door and talk to them over time. And if you have people volunteering for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, they're able to go back and speak to the same voter. So it's a whole different thing. If like you're calling or texting someone on the last day of early voting and saying, hey, did you get to the polls yet? If that's somebody who's talked with you a couple of times, it's very different than completely random thing about who the hell is this person. And in fact, they've found that turnout is significantly higher with the folks where they had that individual follow-up, especially if they weren't, I vote in every election, including dog catcher, kind of voters. Let's see, I guess. In general, Seed the Vote partners with groups that are organizing in working class communities and communities of color. So for instance, this year, besides Unite Here, which they're partnering with on the doors in Pennsylvania, where Unite Here overall is aiming to knock on 1 million doors. Now, if you've done canvassing, you know that means they might talk with, 80,000 people, nowhere near, what am I saying? With maybe some Yeah, maybe 100,000, 80,000. You're talking a million. You're not talking to a million voters when you knock on a million doors, but it shows the scope of the operation and its reach. And Seed the Vote is going to be, not half of that, but an important part of that. I think in Arizona, they were like 10 or 15% of, probably 10% of the Unite Here operation. So that's in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada. They're also partnering with several groups in Georgia, including Asian American Action Fund, New Georgia Project Action Fund, and Standing Up for Racial Justice. And North Carolina, where I'm going to planning on doing a week of canvassing, they're partnering with the Carolina Federation and Durham for All. I'm particularly motivated about that race, although I'll mention it not because very many people here are going to go to North Carolina, but I think it's emblematic of it's the difference that our efforts can make in this election. The Democratic nominee in North Carolina is Sherry Beasley, who was the first Black woman elected to the state Supreme Court. She lost re-election in 2020 by 75 votes at the end of the recount. So the way the winds are blowing, that is a winnable race with the right kind of organization. I mean, I think that when things are that close, basically who wins is going to be the side that's better organized and talk to more voters. And the most effective thing you can do in talking to voters is do it face-to-face and canvassing. So Pennsylvania is much more practical for folks, and I'll get into those details in a second. Briefly. But if there's any way you can spend a day, 2 days or more on a canvassing effort, please consider it, because the next month or so is basically what's going to decide what things look like on November 9th. How am I doing on time?
Bonnie?
You have 4 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
7, actually. Go ahead. 7 minutes.
That's right. I'll try not to use them all then. Just to give you a sense of how effective Seed the Vote's been in terms of connecting with local organizations following their lead and the political impact they had. In Arizona in 2020, they had over 400 volunteers on the ground, most of them for a week or more, although some just for weekends. And they spoke with, not knocked doors, but spoke with 16,000 voters in a state where Trump got beaten by 10,000 votes. When a race is that close, what's the saying about, victory has 1,000 mothers and defeat is an orphan? I mean, everybody can claim a little bit of the credit, but Seed the Vote and its volunteers can definitely claim some of that credit. In the Georgia runoffs, they put 450 volunteers on the ground for an average of 10 days each. With, as you remember, very little time to organize it, because who the hell knew the control of the Senate was going to depend on a Senate runoff in Georgia in the first few days of January. So briefly on Philly details, there is, I should not underestimate, because this will be easy, something that more possible for most people to do, phone banking. Seed the Vote is phone banking with partners in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia, New Georgia Project Action Fund in Georgia. And one thing, not all the calls, but some like the Wisconsin ones are in fact deep canvassing on the phone, where the point is the touchstone is listening to voters' concerns, spending more time listening, frankly, than you do talking, and having a real conversation, not just kind of rushing through and trying to get your numbers. I mean, sometimes that's necessary, but this is one thing that Seed the Vote's partners tend to emphasize is, if you want to connect with folks, you've got to start out by paying serious attention and not just putting on a show of listening to their concerns and engaging with them. And they give you, if you volunteer on either the phones or on the doors, you have the space to do that, which is one reason I like doing this kind of canvassing, because people are interesting. If it's just me trying to kind of run a 60-second spiel and then run on to the next door, it's like assembly line work. But when you get to like converse with people and connect with them, most of them in some way, that to me is a day well spent. So in Philadelphia, if you're in, you can, the best way, I'm going to pop after I finish. I'm not very good multitasker, so forgive me if I've missed anything people have said and add me in the chat. I'll check that in a sec. But after I finish, I'll put in a couple of links to the Clarion article that Luke mentioned, which gives more background on See the Vote, to just See the Vote's own link if you want to just find out more about their operation and their specific and state partners, which are listed there. And if they have volunteer links there, which you're certainly welcome to use, but I would encourage you, and I'll put it back here, to use the PSC link that Luke mentioned. You can indicate interest on either the local congressional races or the work in Pennsylvania. And I think I would just mention there quickly that it's not just Fetterman in the Senate, although that actually is my biggest concern, but the governor's race is uncomfortably close and has been from the start. Mastriano, the Republican candidate, is a full-on election denier. And in Pennsylvania, that's a state where the governor directly appoints the Secretary of State. So whoever wins governorship in Pennsylvania this year is going to appoint the person running their election in 2024. And to give you some idea what Mastriano would be like if he manages to get in, he said he wants to throw everybody in Pennsylvania off the voter rolls and force them to re-register if they want to vote in order to, quote, prevent fraud, which, like the Associated Press, with good reason and with showing the receipts compared to laws from generations past in the US that were specifically designed to make it harder for new immigrants and Black people to vote. So, and also, and people may be familiar with polls showing Fetterman having, you know, a notable lead showing up in poll after poll. That lead is now shrinking. The fact that his stroke impaired some of his ability to speak in a sort of regular rhythm, he's still got all his marbles, and you know, those shifts in his speech have been grossly exaggerated by doctored videos on social media that the right wing is busily circulating. So I think that he's still got, you know, more likely to win. But I think one thing about politics is it's you can't look at a percentage. So, you know, it's 4 points up, you know, that's in the bag. You can be way off from that. And working in politics just means living with uncertainty and trying to cover all your bets. It would be a gross mistake to take anything for granted in this election. The other side is working also very hard. We have to make sure that we work harder and better. And if you think about just what you're doing with your hours in the next 4 or 5 weeks, put it in that context. You know, maybe do a little more and take it easy in late November. If for those who can, not everybody's able, I understand that. So, but just think about what makes sense for you. For Philly, I'm probably running out of my time here. You can canvass any day of the week except Monday. Its schedule on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday is a little shorter. It's like, you know, 4.5, 5 hours per shift. Before canvassing, even if it's just for a day, you must attend an online training on Thursday evenings. If for some reason that's absolutely a time you can't make, I'm sure we can find a way around that. You know, but I'll put my email and phone in the chat, or folks can contact me through Ann or Luke. If you're able to volunteer 5 days, when you're more likely to have that repeat effect that Unite Here tries to take advantage of, then you can have, if you need it, assistance or complete coverage for cost of hotel and transportation. So, you know, that's the door is very open to that for those who can do it at least 5 days. I think that's about it. People are encouraged to start on a Tuesday, but really you can start any day of the week that works for you. Phone banking, if you fill out that PSC form, we'll connect you also with phone banking opportunities, both obviously here locally in New York, and in some of those key states, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania. And those, I think the phone banking opportunities with See the Vote are available like 6 days a week. So pretty much whatever your schedule is, you could probably find a way to plug in that works for you. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. And all this information we will make available to you. I'm sure Bill will put the key things on our website, but this should be going up on the full PSC website, because these are things not just for us seniors to be doing, but certainly for the whole union. So Thank you very much, Peter. We have
Well,
time.
actually, can I mention one very short thing I forgot? It's critical.
Let me think about that. No, of course, yes, yes.
In terms of canvassing with Unite Here, one thing they are a real leader on is COVID safety in face-to-face voter contact. They ran that huge operation in Arizona with very strict COVID protocols and have COVID safety officer on, all the in the field leads. And the only people who got sick in that entire operation, no one got sick, and this is pre-vaccine, from canvassing. There was one couple that broke protocol and went out to a bar, and they got COVID, but nobody got it from canvassing out of, and the 400 seat the vote volunteers are just one small part, or not small, but 10% or something of HRV's operation. If you have concerns about that, want to know details, talk to me, but they're very good and evidence-based on that.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, so we have a little bit of time for questions for Luke, Kate, or Peter. All of them, some of them. It's a lot of information that's been put out, and it's really great because we need to know what we can actually do, right? And we know what the situation is, and we have to do whatever we can in a very short time. Okay, I see Lorraine Cohen and then Glenn Kissack. Lorraine?
Hi, this is for Kate. Hi, Kate. From your presentation, you talked about Working America as being based on class issues, and you gave examples. For example, has the organization said anything about voter suppression or criminal justice or reproductive rights? And if those come up in conversation, I don't know if they do, how is that handled?
So those are really good questions. Actually, I have an example of, I participated in a messaging effort in Ohio in the spring around climate change. If you go to the website, they are the most standard Social Security, healthcare, the unemployment insurance, the issues that you think would come up with these voters. And it's derived from, they have over 1,500 canvassers working now in the battleground states, and they also have regular contact with members. Peter makes a really good argument about trusted people going back to the, at the doors to meet with folks. Working America works that way, kind of at a much larger scale. And they listen a lot. And then they go back and then they test messages. So for example, I wrote a couple hundred letters on climate change to voters in Ohio. I think it was last March, to test out a climate change message. It had come up, and they found actually in follow-up calls and contact that it actually turned people away. It was actually a negative messaging. So, as we know, we don't want to turn out people or turn them into Republicans. And the analysis was that the issue had become hyper politicized, and people were just afraid of it a bit. So they're still working on the messaging. Similarly, reproductive rights is an extremely important issue to me, but it's not one that they have found really moves working class voters in a large way at this time. So right now, the focus that seems to be working very well is around workers' pay, housing, and healthcare. And the organization is continuously trying new messages, testing them, seeing how, what the response is, and taking information from people when they have these open-ended conversations at the doors and on the phone. But that's where working class voters in Ohio are right now. So that's why I'm focusing on healthcare.
Thank you. Glenn Kissack?
I was going to note that there are 51 members of the New York City Council, and 46 of them are Democrats. And I was wondering what the Democratic Party's position was on changing the New York City Administrative Code and degrading our health benefits, which is a big issue for us, right? Well, it seems like the Democratic Party doesn't actually have a position, and that's because it's not a membership party. You don't fill out a card and join the Democratic Party. It's not a party that's going to call a meeting to debate the code and the health benefits and then take a vote. Each individual member is left on their own to make this decision, and each individual member is being pressured by the donors to their campaign and by a Democratic Party mayor who can promise the city council person what they want and threaten them with what they don't want. And that threat is very real. And the mayor is very, very close to New York City's big business community. So it's not clear what the outcome of this very important issue is going to be. So I think at some point it might be a good idea to discuss the power of big money in shaping the character and the limitations of the Democratic Party.
Okay, well, thank you, Glenn. And I think that's a great segue into the next part of our meeting. Before we do that, I want to thank Luke Elliott Negri and Kate Ford Drescher and Peter Hognes for their very informative talks, and they've given us a lot of things to do, which we will pull together, as Bonnie said in the chat, and get to people. And I know that Luke and Kate and Peter are very accessible. So when they give you their phone number, you can actually use it if you feel you want to. So.
And if I could just leave people with a thought, because you mentioned there's a lot of options there.
Yes.
Don't sweat too much which one you pick. You know, it's like
Yes.
the saying about everyone, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So, you know, find your niche, put your grain of sand on the scale, and that's how we win. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Peter. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next part of the program, which is going to deal with the MA plus healthcare, Medicare issue, and the proposed code changed at the City Council. And this is also going to be a very action-oriented part of the program, because we know that we've sent ACT letters. We know that people have sent their own letters to council members. We know that people are making appointments to see council members. And while we don't know exactly the reasons, we do know that here we are in October and we still have our healthcare as we know it. So for the next part of the program, our executive director, Dean Hubbard, will give us a little update on what's going on. And then we will hear from our legislative team, Bettina Damiani and Luke Elliott Negri again. And Debbie Bell will be with us again to answer questions. So let's go to Dean.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm actually going to share my screen with you as I talk through this background, because we have some talking points that we're going to be asking folks to use, and I want you to see those. And Luke and Bettina, if she's here, will explain how we're going to use them in the context of our other big legislative priority, which is to fight these budget cuts that the mayor is proposing, which will affect CUNY and every other agency. Let me just sort of walk you through where we are right now. Can everybody see those talking points? Okay. So we are a member union of what's called the Municipal Labor Committee, which is basically all the unions that represent the 1 million+ people who either currently work for or at one time worked for New York City and are now retired. They negotiate healthcare on behalf of employees, retirees, and dependents of all the city unions. The Adams administration put a lot of pressure on the MLC through what's called the Tripartite Committee, which is headed by an arbitrator whose name is Marty Scheinman, that they would not negotiate contracts. And as you know, you probably know the UFT and DC 37 contracts are both open until they were persuaded that the MLC was taking sufficient action to help get health insurance costs under control. So what the MLC has done is voted to support a plan for the city council to change the city administrative code in a way that would effectively remove the floor on city contributions to the cost of health insurance for not only retirees, but also in-service employees and their dependents. We voted against this. 10 other unions voted against us, but we were overwhelmingly outvoted. This goes back years, as I think most folks in this meeting are probably aware. The de Blasio administration, the MLC during the de Blasio administration made a commitment to try to save the city millions of dollars by doing things to get healthcare costs under control. And last year, they agreed to move retirees from traditional Medicare plus supplemental care paid for by the city to a Medicare Advantage Plus program, which would have been run by an alliance of Emblem and Empire. We voted against that at the time. Lots of retirees, including PSC retirees, vociferously objected. 60,000 people opted out. And the retirees, a coalition of retirees sued, and they won a ruling that stopped the city's plan to require retirees who wanted to opt out of MA Plus to pay a premium, which would have been $191 a month, citing the provision of the city code that the mayor now seeks to change. The reason they're in such a big hurry to do this right now is because there is a hearing in the appellate division on the appeal from the lower court ruling that protected free healthcare for retirees. The problem that we have with this change, the big problem is that it does allow the city and the MLC to agree to eliminate the HIP HMO rate as the floor under the city's obligation to pay the cost of health coverage. The MLC touts the fact that anything would have to be agreed to by the MLC. The city couldn't force the MLC into impasse bargaining, but the fact is, if the city could use its leverage to force the MLC to negotiate a different plan as the benchmark for what they call classes of in-service retirees and dependents, and then they would pay only however much that plan costs. So that's what eliminates the floor. That's why it's likely to lead to higher costs and reduced coverage for city employees and retirees, because that's what it's designed to do. That's how it would achieve the result of saving the city money on healthcare. The proponents talk about the financial troubles that the Health Insurance Stabilization Fund is having, which are very real problems. But the real problem from our point of view is that they are making a permanent concession and changing the law that protects the level of the city's contribution to our healthcare coverage to achieve essentially a short-term fix to the stabilization fund. And we have presented to the MLC many other ways the city could save money on healthcare without doing it on the backs of the people who work for the city. We've talked about self-insurance. We've talked about pressing for reduced hospital costs, cooperative drug purchasing, taking bids from other insurance companies, And then there's, statewide stuff that we could do as well, including working on regulating hospital prices and of course, building a consensus to pass the New York Health Act. So that's kind of my combined presentation of our talking points and an update for you on the MA Plus piece specifically. And now I want to turn it over to Luke and Bettina before we take questions, or just Luke, if it's just Luke here, to kind of dig into for you a little bit what our strategy is with the council.
Thank you, Dean. That was great.
Yeah, Bettina is definitely here, and I'm happy to, if I add a sentence or two after she goes, or I'm here for the Q&A part. But I think Bettina is here and is ready to roll.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I'm here to talk about how we're going to engage the City Council to beat back not only what Dean was talking about, but also a proposed cut that the city administration put forward, not just for CUNY, but through all city agencies. So there is a 3% cut on the table that we need to incorporate into this fight, because we know CUNY cannot handle 3%. It's just on top of the 3% from the previous budget. So we do have a bit of a challenge, but we know that putting these two fights together will strengthen our messaging and get more attention from the council members, which is important. So there's a couple of things that we're doing. First of all, as Dean talked about, trying to figure out the finances around how to challenge the Medicare and the administrative code change. Like, why is it really necessary? Some things are similar on the city level. Like, is this crisis real? Like, Luke and I have been talking to tax experts, and not everybody is as convinced as the mayor that these cuts need to happen. So just to clarify, it's 3% for the rest of this fiscal year, which is until June. And then he's also proposing 4.75% for 3 years beyond that. So to be able to say that what's going to happen in the next 3 years, we've been hearing is a very complicated thing to do, and we think the mayor might be jumping the gun a bit. So we're trying to just gather more information about that. The second is we're going to tap into the electoral strategy a little bit sooner than I think anybody had anticipated. As many of you probably know, we have to go back to the polls for the city council this summer because of the redistricting. Now we got to go back. So we're going to put out a very short endorsement questionnaire to all the candidates to basically say, where are you on the administrative code change? Where are you on the proposed budget cuts to CUNY? So this will do a couple of things for us. One is it will remind them that we have some leverage in the conversation when they start asking for endorsements, and that this is important to us. And it also allows us to start that conversation a little bit earlier internally as we start to see how people are responding, because that's where we're gonna need some of your help. Is there's 51 council members. We need to be able to get to all of them. And between the legislative committee and staff, we've been able to do that, but there are others we'll need to get to. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to share my screen, and we have a list of all the council members, and we've divided them up in yellow and blue. And I know it's too much to do with almost 200 people on it. So I'm going to put a link in the chat that if you want to lead a meeting with a particular council member, you should fill out that form and tell us which one. Some we already have leads on, but be great to hear who else has connections or desire to meet with a particular council member. And then if you just want to join in the meetings, when we have these meetings, numbers really count, especially if you live in the district, if you used to work in the district. These are the kind of people that I think we know will help engage the council members. So before I'm just going to do this so you have a sense of the type of council members that we're looking at, but by no means is it like an end all. So as you'll see, there's some council members that we have a relationship with, but maybe not as close as we would like, especially around these very important issues. So for example, if you're close with Shana Brew or Diana Ayala, I know Luke is close with her, but I think she is the deputy speaker. So she's an important role here that we need to have some power behind when we reach out to them. There's Kevin Riley and Marjorie Velasquez. I know we have some Bronx people in the room here. Felix Oswald, and you'll see that some of these people are important because they might be on the higher ed committee, where we're able to use, for lack of a better word, a guilt factor. Like, you cannot come at PSC members two different ways. So those of you that want to, you should feel free to give me a call. I'm happy to go through this list more closely. You can look at the council website, and it also has a list of all the council members and their districts. But the blue ones are the ones that we're particularly looking for some assistance in. And if you have relationships with them, that would be fabulous. So, and then I will, after I stop talking, put the link into the chat for reaching out to us. Also, we really hope, I am going to assume that everybody here has already sent in the Act Now letter. So I'm going to also assume you all have sent it to 10 other people. So that would be great. We have been in our conversations with council members we're close with. They are getting these letters. It's like the first thing they say, we're getting them. We understand it. We're getting calls, we're getting handwritten letters, we're getting form letters. So this is great. We just need to do more of that. And then the other is, I'm going to make a pitch for staying involved. These are really important issues. And something else is going to come up eventually, especially when we go into budget fights. So please stay involved in legislative issues, participate in our meetings with council members, but also in our monthly meetings. You'll see it's on the PSC website. So that's my pitch to all of you. So Luke will fill in what I missed.
No, you didn't miss anything. I mean, really, thank you so much, Dean and Bettina. Those were like two such crisp, clear presentations. Like, so I hope that was clear to everyone in the room. I will just end by saying one thing, or one and a half things, which is that, like, on the one hand, you know, as Dean laid out, we are a bit of an outlier around Medicare Advantage, right? We are one of a relative handful of unions inside the MLC that's actively opposed. You know, on the budget cuts, for various reasons, there are relative crickets from folks who are representing workers at other city agencies that are also facing these cuts. So there's something disheartening about that on the one hand. On the other hand, and I am like a nut, but I really believe this. As Bettina said, this entire council is up for re-election next year. They just really kind of screwed up on the K-12 funding issue, and they were all a little bit anxious about just having trusted the negotiations without really being tuned into what it meant. And so they on the one hand, just kind of messed up a big fight that they had to walk back. On the other hand, they're very aware that in 2023, they're up for re-election. And so there is this window right now where they're being asked potentially to take two really high stakes votes where every single person in this city will be able to see the positions that they took. And so, like, I think we have a real opportunity here, even though we're a little bit on our own, not completely on our own, but a little bit on our own, to remind them of the salience of these two issues, that those clean votes will be in the minds of many, many, many voters. You know, union members across the city, whatever deals have been struck, will be thinking about these issues. And so I just think, like, the work that we do this month really, really matters. Like, the window is right now. And, like, even though we're a little bit of a, what's the thing, a David in the face of Goliath, there's a real opportunity to win here. So I think we should feel like it matters that we step up and do some stuff. Thanks.
Dean, I see you want to say something.
Yeah, just before we go to questions, I just wanted to also mention that Barbara Caress, who's a healthcare policy expert who actually teaches at Brook and is a member and is working closely with us on this issue, has a really good op-ed on the issue that just came out in the latest issue of Cranes. And then I also wanted to mention that Bill Friedheim does a great job of keeping the retiree page on the website up to date. And so, you know, he does a great job of getting this stuff up there almost as soon as it happens. So I just wanted to mention those two things.
Okay, before we go to questions, please, if you have a question, raise your Zoom hand, because it's hard for us to follow all the questions in the chat. We do save the chat, and you can save the chat too, I believe. by going to the very bottom of the chat, going all the way to the right, and you'll see 3 dots. Am I correct, Bonnie? I think that if I press those 3 dots now, I can click save the chat, and that will save.
I'm not sure if participants can do that.
Oh, okay. All right. So anyway, we will save the chat and we will use it, to the fullest opportunity. Okay, so I see a couple of hands. I see Bonnie, I see Manfred, I see Nancy. Bonnie?
My question is, Bettina highlighted some city council people that if I understood correctly, she thought is particularly important for the retirees to be involved with, but it went by very quickly. How can we find out who these people are?
I will send it to you and then you all can, I'm assuming there's follow-up email that might go out to members?
Yes,
That-
Yes, we can
Okay.
distribute it that way.
Great,
Yes,
yes,
yes.
we'll do that.
Great. Manfred?
Yeah, my question is, do New York State legislators have any role in the Medicare Advantage issue? Is it purely a city council issue?
So in terms of the immediate change to the city administrative code, no, that's strictly a city issue. But in terms of the healthcare crisis, most definitely. In fact, more power resides with the state than the city. And particularly what I'm thinking about is, the 2 things I mentioned, which is regulation of hospital prices. That is a state function. The city, my understanding has very little to no power to legislate on that issue. The power the city does have is to kind of use leverage in negotiating with the hospitals. And it's a lot of covered lives. I think it's 1.2 million, if I'm not mistaken, covered lives. And to use that leverage to try to drive hospital prices down. But it's really the state that would have the ability to legislate on that issue. And then, of course, on the single payer issue, I think the PSC supports the New York Health Act with qualifications. I think one of the qualifications is, how do you do socialism in one country? How do we do single payer healthcare in New York, in a region that includes Connecticut and New Jersey and, Florida by extension. But it's a great first step. And that also, was something that would happen at the state level. So the immediate fight right now is in the city council, but we see this fight continuing, and, a lot of it will be at the state level.
Thanks. Nancy?
I'm sorry if I'm uninformed, but I keep wondering what is happening with the other municipal labor unions who have opposed our position.
So they are in a very, very difficult position because of the fact that their contracts are open and the city has tied substantive negotiations over their contracts, including negotiating on wages, to them agreeing to healthcare savings. And they don't believe that the kinds of changes that we're proposing would save enough money effectively. So we have, a principled disagreement with those unions. But I think the thing for us to be aware of is that we do, in terms of healthcare, we function within the MLC. We're actually, 30,000 member union is a pretty healthy size, but in comparison to some other unions on the MLC, we are small. We do, I hate to use, terms freighted with violence, but we do fight above our weight in the MLC. But at the same time, we have a long-term investment and commitment to really functioning within the MLC. It's in our interest to be able to do that. And so we are being very careful about not calling out other unions or union leaders in terms of their positions on this issue. It's a principal difference, but our focus is on really persuading the council that this is not the right thing to do and not on attacking other unions or union leaders.
Okay, Jim Pearlstein.
Yeah, I want to thank Dean and Bettina and Luke for developing those talking points. And I'm wondering, what's the plan to give each and every one of us access to those talking points? How will that be posted?
So Bettina and Luke are going to be sharing a document that has all the talking points for both of the major legislative priorities that we have for the city council. I don't know if Luke or Bettina, either one of you are sort of prepared to talk about what we're thinking about in terms of getting that to folks who are planning to testify or talk to their council people.
I mean, Bettina, add what you want. I think we're basically there. So that document includes everything that Dean just shared and walked through. We'll be lucky to have you at any of these lobby visits, Dean, because you summarized them so pithily. But then, you know, the top of that sheet will lay out the really two concrete asks that we want to make of every council member or their staff if and when folks are able to organize a visit. And we'll also include a smaller set of talking points about these proposed mid-year cuts, basically to the community colleges. That's what we're talking about, a mid-year cut to those budgets. But I think we're almost there. I mean, I would like our duly elected president to take one more scan on the document, but it's clean right now. So, you know, I think we're basically there.
And so, yeah, and then I think Jim's question is, how are we going to get that out to folks who are planning to testify or visit their council members?
Well, if I'm going to put the link in again, if you fill this out, we'll know that you want to visit a council member, and we will be able to have all your information. And this way, when the hearing dates, I don't know what'll happen with the pegs, hopefully they'll go away, but we can then share all this information with you. And depending on you know what's needed, we'll be able to put more information together. We could meet before and have a briefing in case anything's changed on the details, because we want everybody to feel comfortable testifying.
But meanwhile, Bettina, there are no hearings set that we know of, right? We're hoping or expecting down the line, the city council's supposed to have hearings, but nothing is set yet. Right?
Nothing. We are regularly asking all kinds of chair people and staff when this hearing might happen, and everybody says they don't know.
Okay.
It's sort of like an internal joke. It's like nobody really wants to be the chair for especially the administrative code changes.
Right.
Yeah.
Bob Cowan.
Yes, I just wanted to share, there's a very effective video called "Why I Would Never Choose Medicare Advantage." Search for that with the word video and watch it yourselves, share it with your friends, and maybe with a councilman also. It makes a very effective case why Medicare Advantage is a bad choice. Thank you.
Okay, my hand is up, but I'm going to wait till everybody else has asked their questions. Paige? We have to unmute Paige.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Hello, all. I don't know if this happened to you, but when I retired, I all of a sudden had major medical bills that I had never met before. And, you know, Medicare and my supplemental cover almost all of it. So I'm very happy with that. I went to the rally last year on the coldest day of the year. I'm not sure when it was, you know, the rally that we met with other city workers, and there were a bunch of plumbers there. And I felt like we didn't really know how to talk to each other. And is it possible when we do our or meetings, et cetera, that we can join with some of the brothers and sisters from other unions, including, you know, people who work with their hands more than with their heads. I mean, to have that kind of interesting balance.
Well, I'm not sure if that's a question that our Medicare Dream Team, you know, can answer, but I certainly think that, you know, PSC talks about fighting for the working class. And most of the people who are going to be affected by this change in the Medicare Advantage are much more working class than us, if we're working class. I mean, I don't know who, I don't consider myself working class, but that, you know, I don't want to have that debate here. But, you know, people in DC 37 with the lowest paying jobs, we talk about fighting racism. These changes are going to affect poor people, working class people, people of color, more than we do. So we do need to get working in talking with them and working with them on the ground. I think Jim may be able to say something about that. Do you want to respond to this, Jim? Or, okay, so Paige, I'm going to have Jim respond, and then I'm going to call on Marcia and Renata. Jim.
Thanks. Yeah, directly in response to Paige's question, we're in regular contact with cross-union organizations like COMRO, Statewide Senior Action Council, and activist organizations that represent folks in other unions, all of whom have healthcare committees that we communicate with. So there's a sharing of information, there's a sharing of organizational activity and so on. So that's happening. It could always be better. It could always be stronger, but it's in process.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I think, Marcia, you're next.
Yes. I am concerned about a couple of things and I would like an answer to them. I do not understand why there is not currently a statewide movement active that we're actively participating in for health care for all. It seems to me this is the moment where we could gather the whole state together for this. And also, when we're just asking people to vote no, it seems to me a better strategy is to tell them what to vote yes for. In other words, what we're asking them implicitly is to retain the status quo. But obviously the status quo has some problems, i.e. of the city budget. So either we have to actively push for alternatives to get money, if that's the real issue, that the city budget is going down, and or why not be pushing for this thing where the state could superimpose on the city? I would like Dean to answer this.
Sure. So in terms of, you know, statewide action, again, I think I mentioned that, or maybe I didn't, but we're part of a group called the Coalition for Affordable Hospitals. That one of the good things about it is it includes unions from the city that voted both yes and no on this change to the administrative code. And so we are pushing within that coalition for, I would say, a more aggressive approach to the issue of hospital pricing. And then, as folks also probably are aware, and as I mentioned, the PSC has indicated its qualified support for the New York Health Act. And there's a lot of work to do to build support strong enough statewide for that to pass, including within the labor movement. And, you know, then there is the issue that it is difficult to treat New York as an island for purposes of healthcare. So ultimately we have to push for, and are part of the movement for, single payer healthcare nationwide. And, you know, just my own view, you know, is that now's not the moment where we're going to pass single payer healthcare at the federal level. I think we'd need a significant shift in Congress to be able to do that, and even the president doesn't support it. But it's, you know, ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, that's where we're going to have to go to address the healthcare crisis. And in terms of raising revenue, yeah, I agree. We do need to look at the revenue side. And Luke, among other people, is sort of actively thinking about that and talking to people about it. And we have this immediate issue that we have to face and address, which is that the mayor is pushing for an immediate vote on the council to change the law that protects, that puts a floor under the city's contribution to healthcare. So we do have to fight that.
Yeah, could I just add, I really agree with everything that Dean just said, and agree with what you're putting forward, Marcia, which is why I'm kind of obsessed with, like, where does the money come from? What are the opportunities at the city level to generate new revenue? Like, I think that really matters. And for us to put out a proactive program, including state level New York Health Act, but also, like, how does the city have enough money to pay its bills? Not just don't do it this way. But to underscore Dean's last point, like, this stuff is happening this month. You know, these healthcare savings, this deal goes back a decade. So I'm sorry if we delay it for another couple of months, like, you know, there's a fund that there's a real issue with, but like, it also, you know, it's been around for a decade. And if we have another few months to think about it, I think that's okay. And also on the proposed cuts, like, what I see happening is the executive branch taking the worst case scenario. So basically the comptroller has looked at a bunch of different ways that you could be, you know, in 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, imagining that the worst case scenario is happening right now, and then making the cuts based on that worst case scenario. So I do think that while we need a proactive program that addresses healthcare costs and deals with revenue, we're pretty justified in having a sharp tactical campaign in the next couple of weeks to encourage our friends on the city council to reject these two current proposals, which they are going to have to contemplate. And if they don't have to contemplate them, that means we've won, because it means that someone couldn't get the votes to put them on the floor.
Okay, Renata?
Thank you. I want to support a suggestion that Paige made, which is that we do a more worker-to-worker outreach that, you know, aside from the institutional connection. And I was thinking, can we manage to do something like a poster campaign mounted in subways where, you know, city workers travel and can see, that calls their attention to what's happening and the meaning of it for their health care.
Okay, well, Dean, you heard that, and Luke, you're on the executive council, and you heard that, and we heard a lot of good suggestions.
Yeah, and I don't know how many folks know Frank Clark, our communications director, but we're very lucky to have him. He's one of the best in the business, and he's doing a great job on the communications on this. Was able to get Barbara's op-ed placed fairly quickly, and we'll continue to be working to get the word out in terms of communications. And then, you know, Jim mentioned some of the groups that he's working with in coalition. And, you know, not to give Jim more work, but would encourage folks who are looking for a way to engage members of other unions to, and don't know how to do that, to touch base with Jim.
Okay, thank you. Well, I put my hand up because I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to tell you that shortly you'll be getting a letter from me asking you to donate to Vote Cope. And I'm sure most, if not all of you, know what that is. And I will explain it in the letter. but it's vote coat money that enables us to do our political work. We can't use union dues to do that. So all this political work that we're talking about today is funded by vote coat. And I will send you a letter, and I know you will. We used to be able to have those deducted from our checks when we were in service. We can't do that now. So we can contribute in different ways. So I want to close by reminding everybody to contact us if you have questions or suggestions. We also have a great newsletter called Turning the Page, and we are always looking for ideas there. Maybe somebody has something you want to write or draw, or a poem you want to share. And if you let us know, we can filter that to the newsletter committee. Please check out the PSC retiree website. Bill updates that regularly. There's a lot of information on there. We will update the website with lots of things that came up today. And I think I want to thank now, I don't know if the panelists are still here from part one. We thank them. I really want to thank Dean and Bettina and Luke. Debbie's here, though she didn't speak today. We have a really, really great group working a lot behind the scenes. We don't see it, but working on our struggle around the Medicare Advantage and now the code change. And your letters and your calls and now your visits that we'll sign up for really do make a difference. And the fact that these guys have to get, these guys and gals, these council people have to get reelected in 2023, I think is very much in our favor. So I want to thank all of you for coming and staying the full 2 hours, for your questions, your comments, your support and your future support. And please write to me if you, well, not to me, write to us, because Bonnie and I and Diane read those messages. And keep informed and keep us informed. And we will see you on November 7th, I think, is our next meeting, and we'll let you know about that. So, and thanks, Samantha. And next time we'll make sure, Samantha, if we can, that everybody can save the chat. I don't know if that's possible. Okay, go forth and work. Okay, bye, everybody.